Hey everybody, welcome to Mammoth Interactive's YouTube channel. First of all, I want to thank you for watching this video. And remember that this channel doesn't do Patreon. Instead, we sell our digital courses down below. And every single dollar that we get from the products you buy below goes into making more content. The best way to help out this channel and Mammoth Interactive is to subscribe to Mammoth Interactive's huge library of content. Get thousands of hours and hundreds of courses for a low price down below. We have a monthly option and a yearly option. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the video.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our course, Beginners Power Query and M. In this lecture, we are going to introduce what are Power Query and M. Power Query is a free tool that is part of Excel and Power BI as well, so you can use it in both. It's integrated into the system, so you don't need to install it. It's not an add-on. It's part of Excel and Power BI. In this course, we're going to be using Power Query in Excel, but you can easily do the same in Power BI. The point of Power Query is several points, actually, several uses. Number one, to automate manual and repetitive tasks, typically associated with importing in data and cleaning the data so that it can be used for analysis. As well, Power Query can be used for analysis itself. You can perform data analysis much more easily with Power Query rather than using a complex Excel formula, because Power Query allows you to implement in the M formula language. Here's an example of Power Query. You can take a table and fill in empty cells. With Power Query, it's easy to import and transform data in ways that it would be hard to in Excel. For example, here, you can also aggregate data, filter it, clean it, manipulate it, transform it. You can take a bunch of data about profits per month, and you can translate that into profits per quarter. Power Query was designed to pull data from a source, transform it, and return a transformed version. And since its initial creation, Power Query has gotten more and more tools and capabilities. Another example here, we can take a list of data about sales of a product, and we can count how many times a product appeared in the table. There are three main uses of Power Query. Number one, to import data from many different sources. Number two, to transform and clean that data. And number three, to load data as a basis for reports. Another example here, you can take data about product sales and you can sort the table from the least sales to most sales, or even alphabetical order. However you want to sort the table. You can do that with Power Query and M. This is just one example of some very simple tasks that you can do in Power Query, but you can build very complex queries as well to do complicated tasks. One myth about Excel is that Excel only works with structured data. That is not true thanks to Power Query. With Power Query, we can import data that's messy and then clean it up. And we can get data from a lot of different sources, like a table in an Excel worksheet, or from a different workbook, from a text file, from folders. You can aggregate files from a folder into one file, from a SharePoint drive, from databases like SQL, from an online service like Microsoft Exchange. From the web, you can perform search queries, you can automate web tasks and web searches, you can make API calls. As well, from a data feed or even your Outlook email, you can import this data with Power Query right into Excel. You can also import huge data sets and then manipulate them to get exactly what you want, and then create your spreadsheet so you can work with large amounts of data. Another Excel myth is that Excel cannot handle large data sets, but thanks to Power Query, that is not true. You can make a pivot table from 50 million records, first of all, but also with Power Query, you can work with large amounts of data. You're not restricted to any number of rows because Power Query has its own system, so you can work with a file that has millions of rows and extract what you want. As well, a purpose of Power Query is to transform and clean data. What makes data clean? We define clean data on the most basic term in that each variable has its own column and each observation is in its own row. You can get reports and data from the web, from different sources. That's very, very messy. And it can be hard to clean this data manually or even with Excel formulas. But with Power Query, we can clean our data much faster and it's much easier. And all you need to do is to learn the basics of Power Query. And of course, the more you learn, the faster you'll be able to clean and the more efficiently you'll be able to clean. The time that you take to learn Power Query in M will be worth it. Here's another simple example of what you can do in Power Query. You can take a bunch of columns and you can combine them into one column. For example, for making an address label. The Power Query editor is a graphical script editor. You don't even have to code to use Power Query, but it's recommended to learn M as part of Power Query. This Power Query editor is part of Excel and Power BI. You're going to get to know it well in this course. Again, you don't need to code in M to use Power Query. You can just point and click and do tasks, but it's highly recommended to learn M because oftentimes you'll want to change a query or build your own custom queries that are quite specific to your project. And for that, it's recommended to use M, and you'll find that you will need M as well. But for performing basic tasks, you don't even need M. You could just use Power Query without any coding. You don't have to learn a lot about Power Query to get a lot of benefit from it. A lot of people don't even know that it exists or that it's an option, and they're missing out on a lot of powerful tools. All of the source files will be available in this course for every single lecture, so you can easily follow along with our projects. And this is a projects-based course. We're going to learn by doing, not just by talking about it. So why use M, the M formula language? To build queries for Power Query in Excel and in Power BI. So M does work for Power Query and Power BI. One example here, you can take a table of product sales and you can calculate how much did each product generate in sales as a percentage of total sales. M is a script language or formula language made by Microsoft specifically for Power Query. And M is short for mashup because M is designed to build queries that mash up data. So what does mash up mean? It means combining and changing data to create personalized, customized data sets. Another example here is taking product sales table and ranking the sales. So which of the different products had the most sales? That would be rank 1. The product that had the least sales would have the last rank. M is similar to F#, which is used for financial and scientific applications. And so is M. And that is an introduction to Power Query and M. Join me coming up in our next lecture. We're going to do a course overview talking about what you will learn and as well what you will need to take the course. Very few things. This is quite a fun beginner course with a lot of small hands-on projects that are the best way for a beginner to learn. I'll see you in the next lecture. Hello everyone and welcome back to our Power Query and M course. In this lecture, we're doing a course overview talking about what you will learn and the few things that you will need to take this course. First, we're going to learn how to build our first queries with M. We're going to learn how to join tables, including building tables, combining tables, and performing joins like inner join. Here we have an example where we have 2 tables and we are putting them into one. As well, we're going to learn how to build M functions. A function performs a task, and we're going to learn how to build functions, call them, which means use them, how to use the each keyword, how to change a table with a function, how to loop actions, so perform actions on repeats with functions and with recursion, how to calculate the price after a discount will be one project. As well, we're going to learn how to pass parameters to functions to do tasks like combine text and to change lists. Here's an example. On screen, we have a table and a column has been transformed with an M function. And in the column, we added 1 to each value in the column. Next, we're going to learn how to work with lists. So we'll build a collection with M, or a list. We're going to learn how to build a list with the each keyword, which is going to allow you to build lists really quickly and efficiently. We're going to learn how to concatenate items in a list, such as taking a bunch of items and putting them into one string. And we'll learn how to iterate over a list, so how to loop through all the items in a list. Next step, we're going to learn how to build M variables in order to store data. We're going to build a project like how to calculate affiliate revenue using variables. We're going to learn about the different variable types and variable scope, where you can use variables, as well as order of evaluation. Next, we're going to learn how to aggregate table data with M. This includes counting rows, calculating profits per quarter, grouping rows, sorting a table, querying data from another spreadsheet, and finding where sales met quota. An example on screen here is filling in a table. We have some empty rows, and we can fill in the table quickly with M. Next, we're going to learn how to work with tables with the M formula language. We'll build tables, fill in tables, and format tables. For example, here we have a regular table of sales, and we have sorted the table. Next, we're going to learn how to build conditions by using if expressions, which means we can perform a task if a condition is true, or perform another task if the condition is false. For example, if the sales of an employee was over a certain quota, then we can have a result be that they met the quota. But if the sales did not meet the quota, our result will be that they did not meet that quota. Next, we're going to learn how to work with M data types. We're going to talk about different ways of working with and manipulating text, numbers, date, time, duration, time zone, and more. After that, we're going to learn how to build queries for tables with M. For example, we'll have a list of values, and we'll format those into a neat table. That's going to come quite in handy because oftentimes you'll get reports or data that's very messy, and you have to build queries to clean up that data. For example, you can filter a table and format a list of values into a neat table. Then we'll learn how to build calculations for tables with M, such as building address labels, calculating a percentage of total, calculating sales rank, and counting the number of distinct rows. Finally, we're going to learn how to fetch data from the web with M. This includes querying tables that are hosted on the web, searching for links on the web, and checking if a web page exists. To take this course, in terms of experience, Excel experience is recommended. Basic Excel experience, and we have an introduction to Excel course if you need Excel experience. If you have no Excel experience, just take note that we won't be explaining Excel from scratch. So we do recommend that you have Excel experience, but you can still take the course if you've never used Excel. As well, no Power Query or programming experience is required. We're going to teach you how to program in M and how to use Power Query from scratch. Of course, any kind of Power Query or programming experience will help, but it's not required at all. As well, you're going to need a PC computer because currently Power Query is not available on Excel for Mac. So you will need Excel that is hosted on a PC computer or a virtual machine of PC. And you'll need a free trial or paid license of Excel because we're going to be using Power Query and M in Excel. And Power Query does come with Excel. It's integrated into Excel itself, just in the Data tab. To get a free trial without any credit card required, go to the link on screen. You can also search for free trials of Excel without any credit card required. And that will give you a month's trial. And that is an overview of what you will learn in this course and as well what you need to take the course. I'm very excited to get us started. So join me coming up in our next section. We're going to start by building our first M queries in Power Query. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we're going to learn how to build our first query with M. So let's get started. Here I have Excel, and I'm going to create a new blank workbook. Before we create our query, we need some actual data for a table. So let's create a sample table. Here, let's create, for example, a course and a description table. All right, so we can have a course such as Hello Coding, and then we can have a description such as this is the description, just some dummy data. And what we're going to learn how to do is how to capitalize the content in a column. All right, so we can have another course, Excel Masterclass, and in the description we'll have Learn Excel. All right, so here we have a bunch of data. And let's turn this data into a table. That way we can reference the table via Power Query. So I'm going to select all of these values just by clicking, holding, and dragging around them. Then I'm going to open the Insert tab and I'm going to select a table here. And that is going to create a new table from my data. We're going to select that our table does have headers and press OK. That will format the table here. Under Table Design, as long as you have the table selected, you can go to Table Design and you can rename the table. Let's call this our Course Descriptions. All right, next, let's create a new query to capitalize a column in the table. To open Power Query, we go to the Data tab, we select Get Data, and we select Launch Power Query Editor. That is going to launch the editor for us, and here we can create a new query. Currently we have 0 queries, but we can right click here and we can select New Query, go to Other Sources and select a blank query. So we're creating a completely blank query that's not dependent on a source. By default it will be called Query 1, but let's rename this. I'm going to right click and select a rename, and I'll call this query Capitalize. You can either write the query directly in this line, or you can open the advanced editor to get a larger view of the query. Every query opens up with a let keyword, and then you put in the body of the query. Then you return a value by using the in keyword followed by what you want to return. For example, if I wanted to just return a string hello, I can then press done, and that's going to compile the M code and return for me hello. Then you go back to home and you can open the advanced editor and change the query. Here we want to transform our table. We want to transform one of the columns by capitalizing the column. So here I'm going to first grab my source. So I need to select one of my columns from my table, and I need to then capitalize them. So what is my source? First, I need to refer to the table that we just built together. So we're going to use excel.currentWorkbook, a function that allows us to access the current workbook that's open. Following that, we're then going to pass in the name of the table that we want to reference, which we called our course descriptions. So that's why we had to give our table a name. Then with square brackets, we want to specify that we want the content of the table. We can then use a comma in order to create our next step of the query. So step 1 here was to access the table. Step 2 is going to be stored in a variable called result. And what we're going to do is use table.transform columns. This is a function of the table class, and this is performing a task, specifically of transforming a table. Here we can pass in several arguments. We need the table that we're transforming, and then the operation that we want to perform. So first, the table is our source. Next, the operation that we're going to perform, we put in a list by opening up curly brackets to make a new list, because you can have multiple operations. We're going to have just one. What we're going to do is take one column. Specifically, let's take the description column, and we're going to capitalize the words in the description column. So I'm going to use here text.proper. So here I am transforming the column description by using the text.proper keyword. Now, I have to make sure that my last step is the step that I am returning. So instead of source, I have to return result, because that's the last step of this two-step query. If I press done now, look at that. We get our result, which is that every word in the description column here has been capitalized. This is just a preview of the table. If you press close and load in the top left-hand corner, you'll actually see your results in Excel. So we have the query of the sheet and any connections. Our query that we called is capitalized, and we had 2 rows loaded. So we have this new sheet, and it's our initial table. Remember, we had here our initial table, but now with the query applied to the table. So the initial table will be in blue typically by default, and then the query will be a different color, green. And that is how you can execute your first query in M. You now know how you can capitalize a column in a table using Power Query. Join me in our next lecture. We're going to continue learning how to build beginner queries with Power Query and M. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we're going to learn how to use Power Query and M, specifically the let keyword, to build expressions or steps that you want to perform. Let's create a new blank workbook in Excel and launch the Power Query editor. We've seen the let keyword before, and the let keyword allows you to open up some expression that you want to start. For example, let's create a new query, and this will be a blank query. Then let's rename the query to let. If we open up the advanced editor, we can see that let keyword is the first keyword because it's the one that opens up an expression. And it's also highlighted in blue because it's a keyword that you can't use for anything else. Inside of the let keyword, we can perform steps, we can execute functions, we can build variables. For example, this source here is a variable. We can call this anything we want. We could call this our first variable. Typically, you want your variables to be as descriptive as possible. For example, if I had here my name, I would want to be specific, such as first name, and then pass in some appropriate value. Then we have the in keyword, which is what allows you to return a value. And we want to make sure that that value actually exists in the expression. So in our case, it's first name. If I press done, we get the value of the variable returned by the query. Back here in the editor, we can create multiple variables inside of one expression. For example, we could do first name Alex, we could do course name equals Power Query. Then here in our return statement, we can choose either of these variables to return. We can press done here and we get Power Query. As well, we can put to use the 2 variables inside of our statement. For example, we can make variables that store numbers as well. You don't have to just do text. You can do numbers, dates, durations, and more. There are many different data types. For example, let's say we have here a sales variable. Instead of being a piece of text, which would be in double quotation marks, a number is just on its own without any quotation marks. So here we have one variable, sales. Let's create another variable, for example, number of courses. Again, you want to be specific. Then we can put these 2 together. We can take sales and perform some action on them, like divide the 2 variables. If we press done, we now get our result, which is 100 divided by 12. We can also create a variable to store our result. So instead of doing the division in the return statement, we can do the division in our expression. Okay, here we get a result. So we have created a result variable, and then we can just return the result variable. And if I press done, I get the same thing as last time, 8.3 repeat. So that's how you can create variables inside of an expression. You can also nest an expression inside of itself. So for example, we don't have to just have one let expression, we can actually have multiple. We can have sales equals 100, number of courses equals 12, result equals sales divided by number of courses, but then we can have a comma and we can here create another variable such as our nested result, and this variable can equal its own expression. Then inside of that expression we can perform another task, and here you can do whatever you want. And notice that I'm using tab to indent because that will make it easier for us to read these nested expressions. Here inside of our expression we can create new variables again, such as profits. We can set this to 10, and we can have here a cost, which can be 49. Then we can actually return a value in this nested expression. We can return our profits times cost. All right, so here we can see we have a nested expression, and we can put to use our nested result and our not nested result. We could add the two. All right, so here we can see we have one expression nested inside of another. The one that's inside is the nested expression, and it's nested inside of the outer expression. Here I can press done and we get our result. As well, we can add values inside of an expression. So let's go back into our advanced editor here. I'm going to just save this and create a new query here, so we have our old query for reference. Let's create a new blank query, and we can call this add. Then we can open the advanced editor. Here, our source, it's a variable. Remember, this is the default setup anytime you create a query. Here, we can perform mathematical operations on just numbers, and we can return those by the query. And there we have our result, and we follow order of operations. We can also build lists to store collections inside of an expression. So let's create a new query to store our list. I'm going to add a new query. This will be a blank query, and I'm going to rename it my list. You want to name your queries, otherwise you can quickly forget what they are supposed to be doing. Here, let's create our list. We can call this our course list. All right, so this is a variable, and if I want to create a list, I can use here curly brackets, and I can pass in here a list of strings such as hello coding 1.0 and hello coding 2.0. Then I can return my course list variable. If I press done, we get this table-like structure because we have two entries in the list. Now you may be wondering, what if I wanted to create a nested list? What if I wanted to create a table with more than one column, or a two-dimensional list? Well, for that we can just add a list within a list. So here I can have hello coding and hello coding 2.0 be my first list within the list, and then I can have a second list, and feel free to hit enter here to make this a little easier to read, with tabs or spaces as well. And here we can pass in a second column. This can have strings, it can also have numbers. For example, we could pass in numbers here like 1,000 and 2,000. If I press done now, we can see we have a list within a list. Okay, so we're not quite creating a table here, we're creating a list of lists. We can also create nested lists in another way. So let me just create another list query for this. I'll create a blank query. I'm going to right click and rename here. I'm going to call this list 2. Then let's open up this query. First, let's create an initial list. We can call this our courses. And I'm just going to pass in here a list of strings such as Excel Masterclass, Hello Coding, and Python Finance. Then I want to create a nested list, so a two-dimensional list. I'll call this my list of lists. And here I'm going to pass in 2 curly brackets to specify that I'm going to have a list within a list. And I'll pass in the Excel Masterclass and Hello Coding, but then I'm going to pass in a second entry, a second list within the list. Here I'm going to put in some more courses like Wall Street Coder and Entrepreneurship. Okay, here now I have a regular list and nested lists, where we have 2 lists nested inside of another one. We can also create a list of numbers. So let's create here a list of numbers and just pass in here numbers. Note that they're not inside of a nested list here, nor are they inside of double quotation marks. Typically, you shouldn't mix data types among your lists. That's why we have one list of strings and another list of integers. We can also quickly create a list. Let's call this quick list. This will come in handy. For example, if you wanted to create a list of numbers from 1 to 5, you can just specify 1, then 2 dots followed by a 5. All right. Then we can return some of these results, such as the quick list. If you press done, you can see you got the numbers 1 to 5. If you return instead your list of lists, you'll see here your table-like structure and more. So here's an example of creating different types of lists. And these will come in handy because you often have to store collections of data. Now you may be wondering, what if I wanted to retrieve a value from a list? All right, so here we have our list of numbers. We have 3 numbers in there. What if we accessed one of the values in the list? And let me just make them all different so it's clear what we're getting. To access a value inside of a list, you use the curly brackets after the list name, followed by the index of the value you're trying to get. For example, if you pass in 1 as the index and hit done, look at the result you get. You get Wall Street and entrepreneurship. And looks like that's because we were on the list of lists. Let's try on list of numbers first. It'll be a bit easier. On list of numbers, we get 5 as our result because the value 5 is at index 1. So be careful because index counting in M begins at 0. So the 23 here, the first value in a list, actually has index 0, not index 1. And this is very, very common among different languages, different programming languages. If I access list of numbers at index 0, you'll see I get 23. If I try to access list of numbers at 1, we saw we got 5. If you try to access list of numbers at 2, you'll see that you will get 11. If you try to access an index that doesn't actually exist, then you'll get an error. For example, at index 3, nothing exists, so we got an expression error. There were not enough elements in the enumeration to complete the operation. If you ever find something's not working in Excel as you expect or in Power Query, then look up these errors because these errors are often telling you exactly what's wrong. You'll often also find answers online by people who have had the same exact problems that you have. If you ever come across a question or something that you're not sure about, that's been happening in Power Query. Another thing that you can do is you can build a record inside of Power Query. So let's do that. I'm going to go back to the advanced editor. Now first I want to create a new query. So let's right click and I'm going to create a blank query. Here I will right click and rename this to my record because this is my query that will create records. And let's create our first record here. I'm going to create a variable to store the record. And in order to make a record, you use square brackets instead of curly brackets. And be careful because the M language is case sensitive. So if I try to call the variable record later on with a lowercase r, I won't actually get the variable. To create a record, you have to pass in here some kind of key and value pair. For example, I could pass here course name, and I can pass in Excel, and then I can pass in another value such as the cost, and I can pass this as a number 49. Then I'm going to return the record as the value that the query returns. All right, then I'm going to press done, and look at this. We get this record-like structure where we have course name and cost. So that is different from a list. We can also put in more entries into the record. All right, so for example, we can create a record within a record. Let's call this our nested record. So I'm going to pass in here a record parameter inside of the square brackets. We'll call this our row. And I'm going to assign the row to equal here another square bracket pair where we're going to have our name be some name here like Alex, and that is itself inside of a record. If you now return the nested record, you can see what that creates. So here we have a row with a record inside of it, and you can click on the record to actually see its value. This is similar to creating this nested list. You could click on the list and see the nested list. All right, back in our record query, let's open the advanced editor. And you can put anything you like into a record. You can put in just regular values, as we've seen. You can put in another record, which we've just seen as well. Or you can put in a list, anything you like. And here you'll notice this new line was actually added for me whenever I clicked on the row. So when I clicked on that row to see the record property, this new line was added to the Power Query editor. Okay, so we can keep that. We could also delete it. And let's create another record. Let's create this our large record. Okay, here I'm going to pass in into the square brackets some value. Let's call this a list. Now notice that this is a keyword, so instead let's call this my list, because we can't use keywords and they'll be highlighted in a different color if they're a keyword. Here we could pass in a list such as Hello Coding and Excel Masterclass. All right, so here the property of the record is called my list, and the value of that property is a list. If you press done, you'll be able to see, oh right, we didn't actually return that, so make sure you return the large record if you want to actually see that in the preview. And look at this, now we have our record. Its property my list has the value list. If you click on the list, then you actually get the list that is stored there. And if you go back to your advanced editor, you'll see we actually got a new line automatically added as soon as we clicked on list. And that's how you can build out your first different data structures inside of Power Query. We learned how to use the let keyword to create expressions and how to build out different structures like a list and a record. These are going to come quite in handy the more you use Power Query. That does it for this lecture. Join me coming up in our next lecture. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In this lecture, we're beginning our look at joining tables. We're going to start by building out some tables and referencing them in M. So join me in Excel here. I'm going to create a new blank workbook. Here, let's get started creating our first table. So we need some data for the table. We're going to have a header. Here first we'll have our year, then we'll have our course, then we'll have new students. All right, here we go. This will be the header for our first table. Then we can put in our years here, like we can do 2021. The course, we're going to keep one course for this table, such as Hello Coding 3.0. Then we can do the same for 2022 and 2023. So I'm just filling in some sample data here. New students, we can then pass in here, like do 1,000, could do 2,000 and 3,000 new students. Okay, we can expand this as well, and we can also zoom in. So here we have our table with our header and 3 pieces of data. This table is going to be our Hello Coding 3.0 table. right, so let's go ahead and select all of the content here. Next, I'm going to go to Insert, and I'm going to add a new table, just a regular table type. And yes, our headers are in the table. So I'll press OK, and that will format our table here. If you click on Table Design, you can also name the table. We're going to name this table our Hello Coding table. Let's just do it all in one name like that. Okay, so there we have one table. Let's go ahead and create another one because we're going to be joining several tables together. So I'm just going to copy all that with Control-C and then paste it right over. All right, here we go. So here we have another table, and I just want to change the course name here. We can call this the Excel Masterclass and replace all of the rows in that column. If you click on the table, you'll notice its table name is Hello Coding 3. And all we can do is just change the table name here from Hello Coding 3 instead to our Excel Masterclass. Great, so now we have two tables. I want one more just for a variation on the first one. This one will be slightly different. So here we're going to have the year and the course, but instead of new students, we're going to instead have sales. All right, so here we could put in something like 50,000, then we could do 100,000. And then we could do as well 150,000. Okay, there we go. And we have our three tables created here. Now let's go ahead and reference them inside of our M. So I'm going to go into data, and here I'm going to get data and launch my Power Query editor. Then here I can reference in Power Query my three tables that I just created. So let's go ahead and expand Power Query. Then we want to create a new query. So I'm just going to right click here and select New Query. It's going to be just a blank query. All right, then we want to write out our formula here. So I'm going to open up the advanced editor. Here we have our default query. We open it with the let keyword, and we have our source equals nothing. In the source is what we're returning. So instead of setting source to equal nothing, I want to instead grab the content from one of my tables. So I'm going to set source to equal here excel.currentworkbook. Hit tab to fill the autocomplete. We're using this function current workbook, and then from the current workbook that we're in, I want to grab a table by its name. The name is going to be Hello Coding. We had that table. And then we want to grab its content, just with square brackets, content. Okay, then I can press done, and you'll see what's returned is our table. We have the year, the course, and the new students, and this is for Hello Coding. All right, we can also rename this query. I'm just going to right click on the query and rename it, and I'm going to call this table my Hello Coding query. That means I can refer to the query and reuse it. So whenever I want to refer to my table here, I can just refer to it with the Hello Coding query instead of having to go through and write out this line all over again. Okay, so we have one of our tables referenced. Let's do the exact same thing for our other tables. So I'm going to right click and create a new query, and from the other sources, from a blank query. Then I'm going to pop open the advanced editor. We have the same structure here. I want to change my source to use excel.currentworkbook. And then I want to grab here a table by its name. And the name, this time we're going to choose our second table, which was the Excel Masterclass table. And we then want to grab all of its content. If I press done, I will see my second table appear. Again, I want to rename the query. You don't want to leave your queries unnamed. I'll call this my Excel Masterclass query. So whenever I want to grab the table, I can just reference this query. Then we have one more table to reference. So let's go ahead and right click and create a new query. That is a blank query, and open up the advanced editor. Here for this query, we want to reference our third table. So I'm just going to use excel.currentworkbook again. And then I want to grab here a table by its name. Remember, M is case sensitive, so make sure you have the casing exact here. And let's see, we had our third table. I don't believe we named it. Let's just call this our Hello Coding Sales. All right, and then we're going to grab its content. Let me press done here. And currently we don't have a table called Hello Coding Sales because we forgot to name it. So let's just close the Power Query editor, keep our changes, and we want to make sure we rename our table. So let's go into our sheet 1 and let's go ahead and pop open the table design. Yes, and we're going to change that to Hello Coding Sales. So we just want to make sure we rename that table. Then we can go back into data to find our Power Query editor. And here, let's go back into query 1. Okay, great. Now we can reference Hello Coding Sales. I also want to rename the query. I'm going to call this my Hello Coding Sales query because that's the table that we're referencing here. Whenever you make a change in Power Query the second time, you have to go into your data tab and refresh all, so that way all of your new sheets get updated. So here we have our Hello Coding sheet, which has just that query, our Excel Masterclass, which has our next query, and then query 1, which we need to rename here. Let's rename that to Hello Coding Sales. Now that we have referenced all of our tables, join me coming up in our next lecture. We're going to learn how we can append and combine the tables. So how we can take one table and join it with another. I will see you in the next lecture. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In the previous lecture, we built out 3 tables and we learned how to reference those tables via Power Query. Coming up in this lecture, we are going to learn how we can actually join these tables together into one table. So let's go into our Data tab and we're going to launch the Power Query editor. Here we're going to write a new query, starting with learning how to combine tables. So let's right-click under Queries and select a new query. It's just going to be a blank query. And let's pop open the Advanced Editor. Here in the Advanced Editor, we are going to start with letting our source equal some value. The value is going to put to use the table class here, and we're going to be using combine, so table.combine. Here you pass in the tables that you want to merge as a list. And as you can see, Power Query will give you hints. So with curly brackets, we can create a new list. And all we have to do is pass in the names of the tables. And remember, we referenced our tables via these queries. So we can just pass in Hello Coding and Excel Masterclass if we want to combine them. Right, so we can just take here, Hello Coding, and use a comma to separate each item in the list. Our next table is the Excel Masterclass. So these are the 2 tables that we're referencing by their query names, and we're just combining the 2. All right, then we can go ahead and press done. And look at this, now we have our 2 tables combined into one. So we have the year for each, we have the course, and we have new students. We can go ahead and close and load, and that is going to create for us a new sheet with that query. So it's just called query 1 because that's what we named it. Okay, we can zoom in and we can see this table has been created. So just like that, we've been able to combine our 2 tables. Now, what if we wanted to combine our third table here? This table is slightly different because it has a different column. It has a sales column instead of a new students column. So if we want to join this table, we can do that by joining it with the Hello Coding table, because the Hello Coding table is the one that actually has a similar column, whereas the Excel Masterclass table doesn't have a similar column except for the year. All right, so let's go ahead and create a new query. I'm going to go to Data here and launch the Power Query editor. Here we have our first query already. We can rename this. Let's just go ahead and rename that query 1 just to keep things understandable. I'm going to call this our Join Tables query. You You can also do combine. Okay, next let's go ahead and right click and create a new query. That will be a blank query. We can already rename it here so that way it gets updated in Excel whenever we launch the actual queries. So I'm going to call this my combine Excel, or not combine Excel, but combine hello coding tables. Okay, then I'm going to launch the advanced editor, and looks like I just added an extra little letter there at the end, character. I'll hit enter. Then launch the advanced editor. Okay, here I want to now combine my other two tables. So I'm going to take table.combine again. Here I'm going to pass in a list of tables, starting with my hello coding table and then my hello coding sales table. And you can see they're even prompted for me because we turn them into queries. So I'm using my two queries to reference my two tables. I'll press done, and here we get a preview of what our result will be. So we have here our year followed by the course name. Then we have new students and we have sales. Some of the values here you'll notice are null because one of the tables has that column and another table does not. So what happens is you just get a null value, which means not a number. We can press close and load. And let's go ahead and go to our combine hello coding tables query. You'll notice because we named it before we launched, we can actually see the name of the query. Okay, then I can zoom in here and we can see what the results as the table. So in Power Query, the result was null, but in Excel, you just get this empty cell. Okay, but truly the value is null. It's not blank. So here we have the year, the course, new students, and sales. So that is how we can combine two tables. Join me coming up in our next lecture where we'll continue our project. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In the previous lecture, we learned how we can join tables with the combine function, and we did that for two different instances. In this lecture, we're going to learn how we can perform an inner join of tables. So join me in our Power Query Editor. So we just have to make sure we click outside in some cell. Then we can go ahead and launch that editor. Then we're going to create a new query. So let's right click in our queries and create a new query that is going to be a blank query. We can rename it immediately as well. And this is going to be called inner join. Then let's pop open the advanced editor. Right here, we're going to perform an inner join. Let me zoom in here. There we go. Into the advanced editor. So we have our source. And here I'm going to replace our just empty source with instead table.join. This is a function that lets me join two tables, slightly different from combining. First, let's start with the table we want to join first. That is going to be the hello coding table. We're going to join it with the hello coding sales table, and we'll be able to see the difference between combining versus inner joining. After we specify the first table, we then need to specify what are going to be our actual columns that we want to grab from there. So we want to grab the year, and as well we want to grab the course. So those are going to be the columns on which we perform the joins. They're like the keys. All right, and after we specify the first column, we then need to go into the second table and I'm going to choose hello coding sales. So let me just move over here. I'll just zoom out for you and make this a little bit smaller. So here, first we've joined our first table, and after that we're going to put together the second one. Okay, so we have hello coding, we're joining on the year and the course. Next we want hello coding sales. And again, we have to specify on which of its columns are we going to be using as the keys. And that's going to be the same columns, the year, followed by then the course. After this, we need to specify one more thing, and that is what kind of join are we doing. and we're going to be doing join kind.inner. So as you can see, there are other types as well. Let's just start with an inner join. All right, here we go. So we are taking our two tables, Hello Coding and Hello Coding Sales. The keys on which to join are the year and the course. And now we can grab our result. So we can press done. And look at this. We have a slightly different table this time. Okay, so here we can see we have our year followed by the course name. Okay, and this time, instead of having 6 rows here, we instead only have 3. And that's because we selected our keys as the year and the course. So we're going to be finding those keys in both tables and using them to join the two. Then we have new students as a new column and sales as a new column for each of the years. So the year and the course is considered the key. And we can go ahead and compare this to our other table. So I'm going to just press close and load. That will create for me a new sheet with my inner join query. Okay, and I can zoom in here and we can see our table. So we have the same thing that we just saw in the preview. And we can compare that with the combine. So when we just did combine, this was our result. We had 6 different rows and we just had our columns be separate. But you'll notice there's some commonalities here. There's the 2021 Hello Coding and there's 2021 Hello Coding again. And we got these duplicates because we did combine. But once we did inner join, we got rid of all those duplicates. And look at that. Our result here was now only 3 rows here because we took the year and the course and we found the rows across both tables that had 2021 Hello Coding 3.0, 2022 Hello Coding 3.0, and 2023 Hello Coding 3.0. So we used these 2 columns as the keys, and then we were able to create here a much cleaner new table because now we have new students and we have sales. We don't have any null or empty values. So we were able to join the 2 tables on these key values, which we used the year and the course. So from our 6 different rows here, we found what were the common year and course, right? So we could find all the same instances. And then we put them together into one row instead of having separate rows. And that is an example of using a join keyword here, using the join function, specifically the inner join type. I will see you in our next lecture.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching this course. If you want to watch the rest of the course, the link is down below. Not only do we get the access to this course, but you'll get access to a lot of other courses in a huge bundle. And it's on sale today. So buy before the sale ends. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in another video.